Let me call the meeting to order here and get this, get this thing going. It's now past the appointed hour, 6:31 p.m. We'll call the meeting to order. We presently have a quorum present. I know Greg Balassi will not be with us this evening. This is a hybrid meeting. In other words, we're doing it virtually as well as in person here at City Hall. So therefore, I will ask the participants online to let me know how because I got a new toy out here, how the voices sound, and if you can hear me okay. Yeah, I got at least one thumbs up. I can't hit Christine, you're muted, so.
All righty. It's just a tiny bit muffled, but otherwise it's quite clear.
Okay, so probably an improvement. So let's see. So online we have, as far as I'm just going to deal with the voting members for the moment. Cindy Beauregard, Stacy Gould, and Christine DeStasio. Present here at City Hall are Peter Gauthier, Bill Hull, Greg Caroline, Joe DeLucia, and myself, Mark Betancourt, the chairman. And I got to turn my phone off. So, and with that, as people come in, I'll announce. Oh, we got a couple in the waiting room. Oh, Greg, of course. Oh, Mark Kulos is coming in too, online. So with that, let's go to the approval of minutes from the previous meeting. You should all have a copy either electronically or sitting here in front of us in the room. I'll be looking for a motion to accept the minutes, and then we'll go through any additions or corrections.
Motion to approve.
Motion by Peter Gauthier. Just a note that this meeting is being recorded and all the votes will be by roll call.
I'll second the motion.
Second by Bill Hull. Discussion. Any changes, additions, deletions, corrections?
Well, the comments I provided you included?
No, I didn't want to confuse them, but I'm going to add those in.
So what changes did you bring up? You have?
I printed it out, marked it in red, and I can't read it.
Okay. So with some structure changes then.
I also have one under 4. Discussion, consideration, and actionable items update. Bill Hall made, and it made what? A motion. Did you quote that?
No, I gave Rob.
Oh, okay.
I just
Good job,
can't read
Peter.
my own because I highlighted it. And
Anyone else? Hearing none, we'll do a roll call. We'll do the people in the room first. Peter Gauthier,
yes.
Bill Hull,
Yes.
Yes.
Greg, Joe,
Yes.
me, myself, yes. Cindy Beauregard, you need to unmute.
Yes.
Christine DeStasio,
Yes.
Stacy Gould,
Yes.
Mark Kulos.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. All right. Do we have any public comment? I don't see any members of the public here right now. But there is possibly somebody online. I don't recognize them either. All right, hearing none. Move on. You have the floor, Greg.
Yeah, let me share.
Oh, sorry. Wait, okay. There you go. See what you said. Let's see.
Shut down the lights. Okay. So we're seeing that online?
No.
Okay. Ready? again.
Yes, online, we're seeing it.
You're seeing it? All right, I'm not.
Hang on, now let me get back there because Mark steered me wrong.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm seeing it projected
On the screen, yeah.
the screen.
You see the projection.
Okay, well, hang on now.
I'm not leading you astray.
No, no.
There you go. There you
Okay,
go.
now we got it.
All right, now it's online. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Oh, it doesn't- It's okay.
Okay, so we've got, we covered a lot of distance at the last meeting, and we're going to cover a comparable amount tonight, which will set us up pretty well. So the last time we were here, we talked about a couple things. Today we'll get through building program and start to talk about how we're developing a program for the three options that we were tasked with at the last meeting. Then start to show you how those programs fit in and compare to one another and to the state funding guidelines. Talk a little bit about the existing site evaluations. We looked at 4 of the sites for potential elementary schools, and those are your four existing sites. We didn't look at new sites yet, and we'll look for you guys to give us some guidance on that. Then we've got some next steps, and then the discussion on the public meeting. So at April 6th, we said we were going to move on to a more granular study, and one of the things was for me to circle back with Chief Daly, which I still have not managed to touch base with him. So we'll continue to work on that. We're agreeing on the grade confirmation of pre-K to 5, 5 through 6. What I don't have yet is a confirmation if pre-K will be full day and district wide. So we'll reach back over to the central administration office and see if we can get a confirmation. And at this point, we're just considering going forward that it's going to be. And the worst it's going to do, depending on how this how it moves forward, is you will have either 1 extra classroom or 2 extra classrooms in the program. So if, as you move forward and get further down the road, it's decided that pre-K will not be district-wide, then you would simply scale the building back. It doesn't drive dining or the gym or anything else like that. You could go to half-day and still work. We looked at a number of elementary schools to study and did 3. I'll show you tonight some program guidelines, and we'll try to come up with which one we want to pursue. Site program, I don't know that we're completely ready to talk about until we get some test fits, and then we can move on from there for the new site. So our first step was building program, and I'll apologize in advance if you saw the stuff we posted over to Mark. This is pretty dense tonight. This is could take a while to understand. So we took 3 approaches. They're both curricular and pedagogical. I should also put that one of them is fiscal. So the first is the Office of School Constructions and Grants. That's State of Connecticut's funding mechanism for schools. Following that as closely as possible will maximize your reimbursement at the expense of some teaching spaces. We typically will use the Mass School Building Authority as a check and balance. They are a more recently developed approach to it and are generally seen as being fair to both the fiscal side and the educational side, mostly because their programs have to be approved by the Department of Elementary and Special Education before you can go forward to build. So they tend to be a little bit more educationally aware. And then the working program, which is typically developed by Jim and I and our team, and it accounts for the educational curriculum and a budget. And you'll typically see that fall right around the range, usually just a couple thousand square feet under MSBA. So we're looking at developing these from 3 approaches. One is to work right to what the state says you can do or what the state says they'll participate in. Another is a check and balance, and the third one is what we think would be realistic.
And if I can offer, although the Connecticut standard gives you lowest CGRs, here's what we'll reimburse, you can go back to them with educational argument in terms of why you need a particular program beyond that guideline. So as long as you can make the statement educationally why it's important to Norwich, they will listen. Doesn't mean you'll get every one of them, but you'll have a good opportunity to make that position statement for something more than their base standard.
So, and we'll keep repeating that as we go forward. And typically we say your agencies such as OSCGR and MSBA are funding agencies first and foremost. They are a way for you to afford what you're building or more readily afford what you're building. OSCGR, it's a well-established program, has been around through a number of iterations, but has never stopped doing what they do. They tend to be somewhat prescriptive in areas, and if you look through their guidelines, you'll see sizes down to like 431 square feet, which from a planning point of view seems kind of silly, but it's just algorithms running in the background of their format. They're very tight on programming allowances to the point where administrative space, kitchen space is the big killer in their program. They allow somewhere in the range of about 600 square feet for a kitchen for 300 kids. You can't fit the stuff in the kitchen. So it becomes a little bit silly on some of their stuff. MSBA is a little bit less prescriptive. They have some reasonable programming allowances. They do recognize art and music as programmatic spaces right from the beginning, whereas you can't fit those two spaces into an OSCGR program. You're asking for those typically. So we use that as a good check. And then our working program, as I said, comes between those two. So it's what we've gleaned from working with the central office, looking at your current curriculum, looking at your current buildings, and then trying to find what we think is a fair middle ground to start from. So we looked at, as requested, 7 schools of 300 students each, which closely mirrors what you're doing now, except for the range in your schools. 4 at 5.25 and 3 at 700, and established a couple of comparisons here. So the first of which is OSCGR to the left, MSBA in the middle, and our working program. So OSCGR for 300 kids is 37,500 square feet, and that is the gross square foot number. So the difference back in their guidelines is that they allocate by algorithm circulation space, vertical circulation space, stairs, and all those type of things. So their factor for the building walls is 11%, 0.11. So a gross to net ratio of 11%. The MSBA does not work that way, and most other states don't work that way. You work with a gross to net ratio of about 45.14 or 1.4. So if you were to look at the background of all this work, you would see a vastly different base number and then a much different modifying factor that gets you to these numbers. So 525 kids, 62,000 square feet is OSCGR, 80,000, 81,000 MSBA, and we're saying somewhere about 75,000 gets you a music room, art room, a STEAM lab, someplace where you can get some hands-on project-based learning. And then 700,000 square feet is 82,000, 1015, and 95,000. So these all vary between OSCGR compliant and our working program are generally between 12,000 and 14,000 square foot difference between those two. So here's where you start to see how it falls apart, or where it falls to. 300 student program, we took classrooms, special ed, admin, media, art, music, STEAM, phys ed, and cafeteria. And so the OSCGR compliant, in order to get this to work at 300 students, is 13 classrooms, which is across all 3 of them. OSCGR makes virtually no allowance within the program for a special ed classroom. And we know you need it because legally you need to have it. But to get to 37,200 square feet, it's virtually impossible to include that size space. 960 square feet, 1,200 square foot media center, no art room, no music room, no STEAM room, 6,200 square foot gym, and a 1,700 square foot cafeteria. And they say 1,200 square feet is the kitchen plus all of the dry goods storage that goes with it. Dry goods, refrigerator, freezer, prep area.
In that 600 square feet?
In this case, it's 1,273. And MSBA, when you take that space, they do 1,600 square feet plus 300 for storage. And we hit it about 1,650 and 200 square feet for storage. So you're talking about 1,900, 1,800 compared to 1,200, 1,300. So you start to see, if you know kitchens and kitchen layout, and that's the serving area too, Mark. So that's everything that comes with it.
We have a deli. But we're expanding now just because we have a lack of space.
Yep. So then when we get to 525, classrooms at OSCGR run to 20, and at MSBA they run to 23. The difference there is MSBA uses 23 kids per classroom and OSCGR uses 25. So our numbers come close to that. We're at 21, so we're splitting the difference, and we're using 25, but we come up and round up on one classroom. OSCGR for special ed now is one large classroom, one resource room, and one OT-PT room. MSBA, you see 4 large classrooms with toilets, 1 small classroom, and 3 resource rooms. And we went for 1 large, 1 small, 1 resource, OT-PT. In 200 square feet is really difficult to set up. Workroom and a restroom. So we're splitting the difference there. Admin comes in a little bit higher. Media center start to run pretty consistent. 1 art room, 1 music room, but no storage related to either one of them. We're looking at 1 and 1, and then storage for art. We put in the STEAM lab, which gives you some hands-on project-based. Same thing with phys ed, and then cafeterias are now at OSCGR about 5,000 square feet between kitchen and dining, but still no storage. And we're about 6,000, 7,000 square feet. This is putting a stage at the cafeteria still, not separated. Within the OSCGR, it's difficult to get the stage in. And really all this is trying to make the point is that you're going to exceed the OSCGR bottom line, because you're going to hear people saying you need to maximize the reimbursement. Well, you got to build a school. And so there's going to be some compromise, and the real talk of this is going to be what goes in and what do you ask for in terms of space waivers. 700 square feet at this point, you can, OSCGR jumps up a little bit in the cafeteria, and
Student program.
what's that?
700 students.
700, what did I say? Oh, square feet. That'll do it. So 700 student, and this, you see the classroom numbers start to even out again. They come back around. This is just jumping between 23 and 25. So as you go up, they even out a little bit. And for this one, what the difference between OSCGR and working model, the biggest difference for us on this is at the PE level, where if you're looking at 750 kids pre-K through 5, we're suggesting that you have a gross motor skills room. So that's where you jump from 6,300 square feet to 7,800. That's a 1,500 square foot room for the littlest kids to go and play. So you're not overlapping them in the gym, and you're also not sending them to the other side of the building to get to a gym. It could be a pertinent to a gym at the middle of the school, but it can be used for the little guys, pre-K and 1, so that they're not compromised or taking time away from the gym for the bigger kids. So that was comparison of programs. And then we started to look at how do these test fit? So we get a little bit even more dense now. We dropped the MSBA program because we're using that just as a test, checks and balances for the program itself. And then what we do here is identify program spaces that are identified either in the OSCGR program or our model program. And we identify spaces that aren't identified or aren't accommodated, are too big or too small. So either don't exist, they're too big, or they're too small. And if they're too small, we say they don't work, which is the same as not existing. If they're too big, we say you just have too much space. If they fit, we say we color them green, and we say that that's something you can work with So this first one is 300 students against the OSCGR compliant program. So we're looking for 3 pre-K and K classrooms at 1,260 square feet. And if you read across that, the horizontal, the row for pre-KK, you see that Stanton has 2 rooms at 1,200, Mahan has 1 at 1,100, Quantic has none, Moriarty has none, and Moriarty flatters to deceive because they've got 24 rooms at 1,100 square feet. So in theory, you do, but they're not identified that way, so we lump them all into classrooms. And then Veterans has 2 at 1,100, Uncas has 3 at 1,200, and we know that Uncas and Moriarty are essentially the same building. It's just how you start to divide these up. And then...
No, go ahead and finish your thought, and then I have a question.
Go ahead. I'm just going to say Huntington has none of the spaces that we've identified.
Well, so Moriarty, that was it's an open plan.
Right.
So you're talking about we would divide those up with.
Yeah. What we did was we took it from the exiting diagrams that we were given and the photos that we took. So the way the building is set up now, the center, more or less the center walkway that divides up those areas is narrower than it is at Uncas. So even though the footprints are essentially the same building, the rooms at Moriarty end up reading larger because the center space between them is smaller. And so that's where test fits will start to prove this out. Because if we test fit the same program into Uncas as we do into Moriarty, they're both going to fit, right? Because it's the same footprint. Right. It's just a matter of where you built the walls. So trying to inch towards these things and not just make a leap where everyone goes, what happened? So special ed becomes the real issue because so few of the spaces were identified as such. So we know that there's plenty of rooms in something like Veterans and Moriarty and us, but we don't have them identified as special ed because they're either lacking the in-room toilet, they're lacking the facilities for occupational therapy or physical therapy. And as you get further and start to reprogram these or to test fit these programs, you'll be reassigning those rooms anyway. It's ultimately going to look at a rebuild approach to the building so the rooms will become whatever you need them to become. Admin, Stanton really flatters to deceive because it has the modulars at the north end are listed as conference room. And so we just lump them into an admin space. They're not, we're not seeing them as part of the building itself. And so admin space lumps anything that was identified as not classroom, not something that was related to the kids becomes admin in this graph. So there's a number of them. The OSCGR is saying you're looking for a hit or miss 960 square feet, and they're all exceeding that, so we just colored them all red. Because what it doesn't do in this chart is it doesn't account for all your custodial storage, building storage, material goods storage, all of that is not in that OSCGR program, but it's in each one of those buildings. Media centers, and you'll see this is the only time the media centers really work. They work in 3 of the 7 buildings, and the next 2, the 4 that don't work are a little bit bigger. Art room doesn't exist. Music rooms don't really exist. STEAM doesn't exist. So those are green because the program doesn't call for them anyway. So if the program doesn't call for it and they don't exist, then the building matches the program. And then phys ed, all of the gyms are too small except for the one at Huntington. And cafeteria, virtually all of them are too small except for Moriarty and Uncas, which have the 2 largest separate cafeteria. Because the OSCGR is not considering a gym and a cafeteria as workable, or it was pretty common during the baby boom to build those 2 together. They don't consider those to be a realistic solution. So the gym and cafetorium has kind of gone by the wayside. And almost all of our buildings here are set up that way except for those 2. So if we go to our working model, it leaves very little that works. And it does give you things like Mahan with 18 classrooms, which is more than the number of classrooms we need. but they're about 150 square feet too small. So you've got enough space on paper, but you need to take into account that a lot of the demising walls in these buildings are structural. And so you can't just take two rooms and join them together. Which also, in a lot of ways, doesn't work from an educational point of view because the room gets too long and too narrow. So the kids at the far end of the room aren't really participating in the class anymore. So you'll see a number of these. Waquanic is a little bit different, but Moriarty and Uncas are going to be our outliers through the whole night because we know that there's a lot of room to work within there, and we know they're built without bearing walls in the centers of them. So you've got a lot of flexibility in those two schools. Huntington has a lot of classroom spaces, 24 of them. Very few of them. They average out at 713 square feet. So even the latest edition built relatively small classrooms. And if you're looking for funding from the state, they're going to look to see how close you are to their guideline of 900 square feet. And if you say I'm coming in at 750, which is in round numbers almost 20% less than what they're looking to fund, you start to get some pushback going. We really want 900 square foot classrooms. What can you do for us? So you see at 300 square feet, we're running into trouble already. I'm saying none of the schools has adequate classroom spaces currently configured. Only 2 schools have adequate cafeterias. Only one of the schools has a properly sized gym. That's going to be the theme over and over because Huntington with the big gym is the only one that pops up with the right size gym all the way through this. So 525 students with OSCGR compliant. Here, the green is starting to be mostly what doesn't exist, and that's what's compliant. Classroom counts and sizes still kind of work for a couple of them, and it's unfortunately the one that works well at this size is Waquanic. But getting that building compliant is really going to be an effort. So looks good on paper, but not really doing what we needed to do. And then when we go to our working program, you see that we're just going to end up all red at the next one. It's no real jump there. So here we're saying you're going to be, when we say it's difficult to get to a compliant program for this number of buildings, we'd probably be adding to a bunch of the buildings and maybe taking stuff away. So adding a wing that was, one approach would be to add a wing of compliant classroom and take down part of the building. And that would get you closer to a compliant program. It's not the first place a lot of people go when trying to figure out what to do, but typically you would see at the gym, a larger gym, cafeteria, and some classrooms added, and then other pieces taken apart or taken off, which has some benefits as well. And then OSCGR at 700 students, about the only green you get here is the things that don't fit in the OSCGR program and don't exist in the buildings now. So the workroom, conference room for special ed, the STEAM lab, musical storage, staff dining, all those pieces that don't exist, don't fit into the program, don't exist anyway. And at 700 students on our working program, it's pretty self-evident that, and this would be the fun one when we do the test fits, when you start to see what can you salvage of the building, what would you need to add to make it work. It's not going to be as simple as add a floor, because none of the buildings are set up to add a floor to them. So it's going to be built alongside of it, and then the ultimate thing might be a site that looks a bit different and salvaging pieces of the building and building alongside of it. So here we're saying none of it is going to work. Pretty much nothing works for either OSCGR or the working program, but it certainly gives us a place from which to start. So step from there, and so let's look at how the sites might work. And we looked at Moriarty, Uncas, Veterans, and Stanton, and I took these to OSCGR guidelines. So this is 10 acres as a base, and then 1 acre for every 100 students or part thereof. It gets you the site that they would say is a starting point. Doesn't mean they won't participate in a smaller site. Certainly for an urban district, that's always a discussion that they'll have. But as a starting point, you would need 13 acres at each site for the 7 schools, 16 acres because it's 15.25 and they round up, they don't do parts, and then 17 acres. So 13, 16, 17 is what we're after. And so here's now the schools are to the left side, OSCGR is to the right side, land size and building size. And so at Huntington, you've got 4 acres, you're about 8.8 acres under. Mahan, you're 2 acres under. Moriarty, you're 1 acre over for 300 students. Stanton is well over, and everybody else is under. 525, Stanton's the only one that works, and at 700, Stanton works. So that made it kind of interesting and raised the stakes for the Stanton site for what we did next. And so we look at Moriarty. Now, this is from the Connecticut GIS, which is augmented by the city. And we turned on every filter we could find for wetlands, stream courses, unsuitable soils, historic districts. I think every one of your schools ends up either in or close to one. So it's almost a moot point. And then land preservation districts, all of your schools are designated as municipal open space, which is pretty typical on the Connecticut GIS. It's seen as held by the public, so it's seen as public open space, which for the sake of this discussion just makes it more complicated to talk to people because we know they're built, but they end up listed that way for some reason. So Moriarty, long story short, the heavy black lines are 10-foot contour intervals. So we all know Moriarty is relatively flat. It's 300 foot above sea level on the lower right and 290 on the upper left. So it's a nice, relatively flat site. The little green blob coming in from the upper left is a wetland. There is no indication of 100-year or more drastic flood worries on that site. So overall, pretty good site to work with, has a lot of potential and flexibility. And this is Stanton. This is the one that surprised me because I thought for sure there was going to be some kind of stream crossing behind the building. And what happens is this site rises up pretty well. It's 100 foot above sea level right behind the school, and it's 170 at the east border. So you pick up about 70 feet in elevation. That green blob of slime coming down is it's a wetland or designated wetland and flood zone, but then it's piped under the parking lot. And on the other side of the parking lot, it opens up again. So with one filter, it ends up showing that your parking lot is a flood zone. So I couldn't get that filter to come back on. It turned on and said, this is a flood zone, but then turned off right after that.
So I'll tell you that it's probably not a flood zone, probably never flooded, but in that green blob is a spring.
Okay.
And it is piped across the parking lot, as you said, and it makes its way across into what's called Gardner Brook, which then just down the road goes into Ford's Pond, which eventually makes its way all the way over to the golf course and then to, it's near, well, actually ends up in the Thames River.
Right. And doesn't Gardner's Brook go past Mahan? Or something that feeds into Gardner's goes
Behind
past
it.
Mahan, I think. Yeah.
Behind it, yes.
Okay.
Yes, because
that makes
that
sense.
neighborhood that's behind Mahan
Right.
is right next door to the golf course,
Right.
and it winds its way through all of that.
That would make sense. So those two tie together. So this site, the only thing that I need to do a little bit more research on is you can just about see from the lower right-hand corner, if you come in a couple inches on that wall, you see that cut, which looks like an old farm road or something.
Yeah.
And then there is what looks to be an old farm wall running straight up and down that crosses that. I don't know that either one of those have any historical significance. I know that this part of the state, in some cases, has the old Indian walls that were built as part of they're similar to Stonehenge. We've run into them in Groton, and you have to document them. This looks more like a farm wall. It's way too straight and doesn't seem to have the orientation that the Native American walls do.
That is, you're most likely right. That's probably an old farm wall.
That's what it looks like.
Really back to colonial times. This was all orchards and farms out here.
Okay.
When I was in the police department, I drove this beat for 6 months. Okay, and I used to be able to drive a cruiser all the way through there, and it actually pops out on Maple Street, which is a street that runs parallel to West Main Street on the other side of this.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know that we'll find anything historically significant there.
Okay. And it may be that, given that there isn't a stream where we thought there was going to be one, that you don't need to go that far back on the site either to make it work. So this site actually looked quite good when we looked at it that way. Uncas it's off of this image before you get to anything of any real concern. This does pick up about 25 feet from the elevation of the school, which is at 154, to that field is at 172. So it picks up about 18 feet up to that field. Good thing is it's got a pretty good chunk of land around it that you could move the fields back and perhaps expand and work with that building within that neighborhood and not have to do much more with it. But no real restrictions there. And then finally, Veterans ended up having more land than we thought it was going to have, but geographically challenged might be the way to say it. And you get down to the east side, that lower right-hand corner, you're dropping down pretty sharp, and you end up in the wetlands when you get down to it. So it's
that back boundary on the right-hand side, where that wetlands is in the lower right-hand corner of the image. There's a water course that runs through there, goes back behind. That's a former nursing home above it, and it makes its way down Crouch Avenue, and then eventually it makes its way to the Thames River.
I was kind of surprised that it didn't show up as a perennial water course. It probably will on a field survey, because the topography definitely shows it flowing that way, but it doesn't show up on the GIS, which kind of surprised me. But I threw Veterans in there only because it was the next best site after the first three. You know, there's actually the land over at Chase has 10 point something acres, but it's long and narrow and follows the highway. It's not really all that usable for us. So I thought that these were the four that were most in keeping and most probable, and I would probably toss Veterans and work with the other three, and then whatever other land might be identified. So that kind of took us through it.
That last, just to tie a ribbon around that, I would imagine that at best, that water course is going to be seasonal.
Right.
Because there's not a lot going on water-wise back there. Water table gets high enough, you see a little bit, but.
And our problem with regulations nowadays in New England is there's no differentiation between seasonal and perennial. If it's there and it gets wet, it counts. So I think if everyone agrees, Veterans is we probably run our course on Veterans, and given its location and the site and some restrictions, unless we go with 300 students, in which case it seems to fit pretty well until we try to get a field on it. Because part of the test fit of the program is also how does the site work, and right now it doesn't have a field. So if we were to pursue 7 schools, we would be developing the age-appropriate playground for 2 through 5 year olds, 5 through 12 year olds. So you'd see a block for each one of those, and then a play field of whatever we all agree the right size is for each one of the buildings, and that would be the proof of concept for each one of the schools if we pursue 7 schools. If we pursue 4, the playgrounds get bigger, the field gets bigger, and therefore it might not fit on some of the sites. And then if you pursue 3, they get incrementally bigger again. So any questions on that? It's like, I think I just overwhelmed you. It's like just a whole bunch of stuff here.
Certainly have pointed out significant challenges that we will face in the future. And it's nothing that some of us were unaware of from the work we did on the previous committee. These are all things, basically, what you talked about are things that we, considered 2-3 years ago, before, this committee was formed. So it's certainly not really any surprises there for us. So in fact, the veterans is a good case in point. Topography was our biggest concern there. What you could do with whatever property, whatever land you have available for use, the topography, almost limit or prohibit anything done with it.
Yeah, you run to either they're either small sites or they're oddly configured, because teachers is a really oddly configured piece of land. That just goes all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, there's a fair amount there, I think, so.
If you
It's
look
just
at
got
it,
a little bit and then the ball field sits on top.
yeah,
and whatever.
it's kind of like a rag doll that the dog got tired of playing with. It's kind of really narrow in the middle and really wide on either side. But when we look at middle school fitting, I don't think you have any trouble with it. It has the field up high, so you won't have to be chasing fields. I think that just needs a couple more classrooms figured out so you can balance the middle schools. I'm more concerned that we get a good jump on test fits for the elementary schools. And so we can have a good discussion on those, which is kind of our next steps here is I still catch up with Chief Daly, confirm pre-K. And I think at this point, I'd say, why don't we just move forward the way we're doing this? The pre-K is going to be accommodated because, as I said earlier, the worst you're going to do is lose one classroom maybe. At 700 kids, you might lose two, and all that'll do is bring your costs down. But it's going to be incremental as opposed to exponential. If we go either way, if we add it or take it off later, it's not going to make much difference.
I know there's been talk at the state level of possibly making it mandatory, so I mean, it hasn't happened yet, but it's not that I know of, but certainly it's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, we hear it in every state we work in New England that everyone's expecting it within about 5 years. Middle of the decade, towards the end of the decade, they're expecting it. Investigate potential non-school sites. I know we've talked about a couple of them, but I just need to get them either a street address or something for the sites that you and I were talking about last time, and then we'll do the same thing.
I suggest you'd probably reach out to our public works director.
Okay. Okay.
So
I'll do that.
he's actually helpful when we've had some discussions about that before.
And then
He's got every map of
got
every
everything,
culvert
yeah.
and every
You know,
pipe, little stream.
Yeah, so I would definitely talk to Pat. He would certainly. I'll drop him an email note when we get out of here. Just to expect to hear from him.
what's his last name?
McLaughlin.
Okay.
Mark Poulos, you have your hand raised?
Yes, well, obviously, the seven school plan doesn't work. I mean, Waquanic and veterans are challenging to say the least, if not impossible. So I think at this point, we have to go with either the 3 or 4 school plan and scrap our consideration for the 7 school plan.
To that point, does the 3 to 4 school plan still include the idea of building a new school somewhere on a site to be named? That
4 would probably include it. I think 4 would have to include it just based on what we saw. 3, I think it would come down to what sites you have, and would it be more economical to build 1 new school as opposed to renovate 3? And that's where your test fits will start to tell you what the deal is. Because I could be wrong, but I don't think Stanton is on sewers.
It is now. I believe it's on to the town.
Is it? Okay, because it still has the pump.
I don't know for certain. So
Okay, I'll ask Pat.
Yeah, we expanded sewers in that, a number of years ago. I'd have to look at the report. But,
Okay. And I can ask DPW. But the only reason I say that is the pump.
Stacy, you remember?
The pumps are still there.
Wasn't Chris
Wait a
Soros?
minute, Chris LaRose is on. He was, anyway. Chris
Yeah, so I
LaRose-
believe, oh, hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I believe Stanton is on sewer, but it has a pump station to get it to the sewer main.
That makes sense. Okay.
And I'll
It
confirm
looks-
it right now.
Yeah, it looks like they left the pump station right where it was for the septic system. And so it reads as the old septic system still in play. So that would really help us there.
Yeah, it was a number of years ago. Not that long ago. It's since my time on the city council and stuff, and it was during that time that,
Okay.
they ran sewers.
Well, the good thing there is that If we go east on that site, we're going uphill, so the pump station would still work. Because it'll just run down to the pump station and out to the street, so it's not like we need a pump station to a pump station, which becomes a real drag.
And
that- yeah,
as long as
that-
it flows downhill, was the saying the other day.
Absolutely.
What are you going, now, the 26th is the town meeting?
Yep,
Yeah,
26
Okay,
will,
now, are you going to present to the town 3, 4, or 7 options?
well, that's what we need to talk about is, as this group,
Okay.
what do we take to those guys? What do we take to the public? Because what we're going to do when we leave here is we'll follow on from the statement that 7 schools doesn't work, and we'll kind of get consensus on, do we just work on 3 and 4? And then we'll do test fits, we'll do site fits, and we'll move that along. And then typically your public piece, which is that, which Jim has his handouts, is to get everybody up to the speed where we are tonight. Not to get ahead of the committee, which is always a problem, but to just say to people, here's what we've been doing, and here's where it's starting to look like, and this is where we need your input as residents of the city. So there's a couple things on there, and Jim can tell you what.
So we're using the 6:30 start time that was identified. We're identifying an hour and a half, which is similar to what we did at our last meeting. So I mean, we can conclude by 8 o'clock. This thing breaks it down into kind of 10-minute intervals. So from 6:30 until 6:40, we just want to have materials up that people can come in, look at it. If they have an issue that's important to them, let them go to what's important to them. The work that we should do collectively, and this includes everybody at this table and online, we should just walk around and be shoulder to shoulder with people as they're looking at something and ask the question, why is this of interest to you? Or, you know, and 9 times out of 10, if they're looking at a site plan, they can point to their house, which is right around the corner from it, or my kid goes to school at this particular school, you know, that type of thing. But that first 10 minutes is really meant to allow people to have the time to kind of come in, get settled, look at materials that we have available, and then we'll start the meeting at 6:40 with a welcome statement, and that should come from this committee, just in terms of letting people know where you've been and where we're heading. And it's 2 minutes. I mean, I have it listed here as 5. It literally can be a 2-minute statement to get us off and running. From there, Greg and I'll do a process overview, just update people on where we've been since we've come into the community, and that includes everything from the collection of information at each individual building through the course of our time early on in this process, to the educational planning and programming conversations that we've been able to have, and also the demographic information. So it's kind of sharing everything that's been collected to date. And that'll run through about 7 o'clock. That's just about it. It's listed as 15 minutes. That's probably a 10-minute overview. The next, starting at 7 o'clock, is actually the introduction of the workshop, breakout introduction. What options are being introduced and what breakout sessions are available, you know, for conversation. And we typically break it down to 3 or 4. You know, Greg shared with me that the invite for this just recently went out. So, I mean, the good thing about these formatted workshops is that we could accommodate very small groups and very large groups. It can flex very easily. But with 3 breakout sessions, we should be able to handle just about anything that shows up at our door that evening. The 3 that we're recommending is one that's focused on kind of the building and sites. So we call that one container. And in that breakout session, we'll have mappings of the different sites. We'll have some of the information that Greg just shared in terms of analysis, et cetera. And really, it's hopeful that we can get a conversation within that breakout session around what do we know of sites, as we're leaning to a 3 or 4 school configuration, which of the sites are seen as strongest by those that are there, and also help us test out our observations of the 3 or 4 that we think are strongest.
That would also get some discussion of the current condition of the buildings,
Yes.
which is what brings a lot of people out. They just want to know, A, that you guys know the condition of the building, and B, that we know what it is, so that it's a shared understanding of the building.
So within that breakout session for containers, it'll be our project manager, Ron Palillo. He'll be teamed up with Brad from CES, or SLR, excuse me. CES, got it. Thank you. CES will be there. And they actually did the on-the-ground observations of the building, so I have a real good working understanding of what these buildings are about. The second breakout session is contents. This speaks to educational planning and programming. It'll be led by Greg. Nassif Palmer from our studio will be there to assist him. The reason why we assign 2 people from our office to these is so one could be the facilitator of the conversation, the other is writing down things on newsprint so that we can capture it and have a listing of what we heard that evening. The third is called Currents, and it focuses on demographics and community trends. So utilizing some of the information that's been developed through Cropper GIS, be able to share with people where has your community been, where is it in terms of shaping and configuration, how many people at certain age groups throughout the community, what does that mean to the individual schools, and be able to have that conversation. And I'll be able to lead that, but I would need a volunteer from this group to help write on newsprint things that we hear. So I won't ask for the best penmanship because none of us have that on our team.
You'll be talking to the wrong guy here on that one.
But at any rate, that's the third workshop. And the idea is that we talk about these workshops in the overview, the workshop options introduction. We go to them for about a half hour and let people go sit down, have individual conversations. Greg and I will make sure that people know they can get up and move to another breakout session. If they came with one particular question that's around building, but they also want to hear something about educational planning and programming, we want people to move around. And that's why we ask for flat floor space. And that's why we ask for it to be, nearby so that people could easily move from one to the other.
Okay, Mark Koulos, you had a question?
Yes, there's also a housing study that's been done or being done. I don't know if that information would help them, DRA, in the it would kick into the demographic study that was done, so that you could see where the existing housing is. And
is that housing study concluded or is it in process?
Not sure. Joe?
Do you know if there's an electronic copy of this available on your website?
Should be. Thank you.
Yes.
I was going to say it should be.
Thank you. We could get this to Matt Cropper.
Yeah.
Because that type of stuff would be very valuable.
Do you need that back?
No, I
Okay.
can get another copy.
You know where to find one?
Well, I'm meeting.
I think there is a copy online on the council website.
Okay. Well, that's very helpful. Thanks for pointing that out. We'll share that with our demographer, and we'll see if it influences anything that he's observed. I'll also read it prior to next week so that we have a working knowledge of it.
We also should ask them, Peter's question about pre-K.
Yes.
If it drives anything other than that first year of their demographic. I don't
Having
think
worked
it
with
does.
Matt before, I don't believe it does,
Yeah.
but I'll confirm that with him. So the breakout session's about a half hour. We should wrap it up about 20 of 8. What we like to do at this point is just break, so we're all together at the beginning, we break up, and then we like to bring everybody back together for the recap, and that's from 7:40 until 7:50. And this is where we'll take that newsprint with the writing, and we'll ask each of the facilitators from the 3 breakout groups, what are the top 3 things you heard relative to buildings? What are the top 3 things you've heard relative to trends in demographics? What are the top 3 things you've heard relative to educational planning and programming? And at least what that will do is for somebody who has sat in educational planning and programming for their breakout session, they get a little bit of an understanding of what some of the overarching issues are as reported by our teams. At the very end, 7:50 until 8 o'clock, and again, this can be a one-liner or a few, comments, but again, something to close down the evening from this group, thanking people for coming, letting them know what next steps look like. The idea that we'll want to have a 3rd workshop so that we can bring in front of people kind of more developed as these ideas evolve and we start getting more certainty around them, be able to have that in the future. And I also listed on this that study information can be viewed at your website. And I was thinking that, as a PDF, the information that we're sharing that night can be placed there. If you guys can get videotape of this, we can break it down into small snippets and be able to share it there. It's a great way to be able to get more mileage out of it if you don't get the turnout, that you're looking for physically, is to have that information available for replay. And I know a couple of weeks back, we talked about it and there was some statement that there are some options in terms of video, being able to tape the,
Yeah, they do have some equipment there. I mean, they do
Yes.
broadcast the Board of Ed meetings out of there and that kind of activity. So
would we be able to get the actual manpower behind it?
we may be, I had asked about that, so I'll follow up.
Now, this town meeting, this is just strictly presenting information. So it's presenting information. We're not asking them which way to go. It's just.
In a broad way, you're asking for their input. What do you think?
And how do you take that?
As Jim said, if you have one of us will be facilitating a conversation, someone else will just be writing down what they hear. And what we try to do is to get people, you get someone to say, and if they don't say it, then we'll say it. Like, I like the 3-school option. Okay, well, how many people like that? And you just get that conversation moving. People need to feel at this that they can say what they need to say and what they want to say. The next one would be likely in May fairly quickly so we can wrap this up for June. And that's where we would come back and say, based on what we heard and based on the reality of the world, here's where we think you should go. Like this. And here's how it would look. And here's how it may roll out. Tell us if you think we're just driving the bus off the cliff. And that would be the next meeting.
And I'd like to say that information, although it's winnowed down to, we're very close to a recommendation, it's not final. It's something we're in front of people because we want to hear, do they have a response? And if they have a response, we want to have enough time to augment what we've done, if it's a good idea, to be able to reflect that.
Mark Kulos is saying that it's appended, the study's appended to at the end of the council agenda. I'll send you a link to that he just posted. So,
That's
Thank you.
the housing study.
Yeah.
Okay.
We should, Matt, tomorrow. I'm gonna be on the road early.
And that was presented to the council literally last night, so that is hot off the press right
That's
there.
fresh
That's
meat.
great.
Yeah.
That's
But
fresh
that's-
meat, but it's gotten some press, you know.
Yeah, and
too,
to,
so
and to that end, people might have that in their thinking as they come to this meeting. So it's great. Thank you for letting us know about it.
Certainly some
Mark?
issues. Yes,
Yeah, this is the mayor. That study is an examination on the percentage of low-income housing in the city of Norwich. I'm not sure it's focused on the issues you're looking for.
Yeah, I
Certainly
know,
wouldn't
I know
hurt
it's-
to look at it, but we were asked to determine what our percentage of low-income housing is and what's our plans for adding more to it. This is being driven by the state.
Yeah, very appropriate, Mr. Mayor, in terms of that those become the primary feeder type of areas into elementary schools. And so it may very well influence what the demographics and enrollments are saying.
From that perspective, it could certainly help us,
Yes.
or in other opinions, not help us.
well, we already, as you know, we already have a very, you know, at least by their definition of affordable housing, you know, more than, you know, what is required, but they always want more.
We're around 18 to 20%.
Yeah, but that's using their definition of affordable housing, and it's,
I
Not-
agree.
not-
I think we're higher than that in actuality.
Okay.
What was the report that was presented?
Putting on the percentages and the condition of affordable housing.
all right,
So that's what I have on this, Mark. I will stop sharing.
okay, so I don't know if there's any other discussion on the report, we kind of skipped over that, but I didn't see anyone raising their hands or anything, so unless somebody else wants to chime in, anybody? So I think we're, hearing none, I think the next on the agenda, I think we've talked about the 26th event, we have that covered. Is there anybody, does anybody have anything else to be brought before the committee before we adjourn?
Just for the 26th, should we at least have two people who are going to attend each of the sessions? Put our names up there.
Well, I thought, at the beginning, I would introduce the committee members at least at the very beginning, point them out, you know, raise their hands and stuff, and we'll,
I'm talking about just for us
Oh.
to be represented at each of the three sessions. That's all.
we can divvy it up.
Those are very
We
simple.
just divvy it up because it.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Right, when, you know, it's,
Whoever
I'm
shows-
saying, should we
we
do
all,
that?
we all plan to be there and then all of a sudden life happens, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, it's not a,
Mark, this is, Mark Kulis. I don't, do we need a vote to direct DRA to just, concentrate on the 3 and 4 school plan and scrap
If
any
that's what you
efforts on
wanna
the 7
do.
school plan?
if that's what you want to do, but I just do want to make sure that as we go along, that we make sure that, you know, that we tell people that we did consider the 7 school plan, and the reasons why, you know, we decided not to go along with it, that's all. So, I guess if you want to make that a motion, just to consider a 3 or 4 school plan.
All right, yeah, well, let's do the motion that, I make a motion that we direct DRA to concentrate their efforts on either a 3 or 4 school elementary school plan.
Good. Is there a second?
I second.
Second by Greg Terrabini. Is there any discussion on the motion? Joe DeLucia.
With all due respect, I'm hesitant that we should be doing this tonight. I think that we should get through the 26th and hear what the community has to say before we direct the architect to pursue any avenue yet. It just feels just a little bit too soon and in that way somewhat presumptuous. Although everything seems to be pointing in that direction, let's hear from the community, at least in the first of the 2 sessions, before we make any of those decisions.
What happens if the community says they want to go to 7, even though it's not reasonable?
they're the ones that are gonna be paying for it, so they determine what.
Yeah, we haven't talked dollar amounts or anything yet, so.
Right.
No, but basically, you know, the firm we've hired is recommending 3 to 4. So my fear is that, so if we, and I agree with Joe, I mean, no, but if we go and they say, no, we'd like the 7 option, then what do you do? It's not economically feasible.
I hear what Joe's saying, but I just think if we're not gonna be there, then, you know, maybe we do that. Jim?
But to the point of what if somebody shows up and says, I like 7 versus 3, 4, name another number. That's the idea of a community workshop, is to be able to have a forum where somebody can come to the table and offer, they feel strongly, 7's best, and let them make their statements why. Because we can identify what are the 3 or 4 reasons why somebody thinks 7 schools works best. We then can, as we continue our study work, look at dollars, look at educational outcome, look at site capacity, look at what does it mean in terms of an overarching master plan for the community. Is it something that's achievable over time? And be able to say at a future meeting, there was some discussion and consideration of the benefits of a 7-school approach, but for these reasons, and be able to tick them off very carefully. This group, this committee feels strongly that 3 or 4 is in the best benefit or best interest of Norwich, and it's most prudent to head in that direction.
Based on all the information you presented, we're really looking at 3 to 4. So it's almost
It's more
false
about,
advertising.
it's more about buy-in, Greg.
Pardon me?
It's more about buy-in.
Right. Well, I'm just saying, if we say, you know, we looked at 3, 4, and 7, and someone or a group says, you know, we like 7, then it's just hard, you know, with the information you've presented, is the information they presented going to be available prior to the town meeting?
Well, it'll be available because it's on your site, but it won't have been explained yet. So what
I'm saying, but is it possible if you've done very granular, and at the end of each, like at the 300, you know, students, the 5, whatever it was, the 7, you came up with the pluses and deltas. If you could take that information and consolidate it, that it would be available prior to the town hall meeting, so someone could see that if they chose to.
Or we could bring it there and use it as part of the educational planning and programming.
Okay.
At 7 schools you have this, because I think what you're going to see is people are going to say 7 schools gives me a neighborhood school of 300 kids. It's undeniable, except you don't have neighborhood schools because everyone's going from all over the place to get there. And you don't have the ability to offer the educational program that you can at a bigger school. And that becomes that discussion. So you're trading off the precept of having a neighborhood school for the reality of having a bigger school that is modern, it's updated, and it offers a better curriculum. And the problem that you always face with this is you guys are out here and the public is here, and you need to be thinking of back here now. So what I would suggest we do is we take the idea that 3 to 4 is probably the best approach, but everybody needs to hear what you guys have been hearing. And they need to hear it in the little snippets like we did over the last couple of meetings of here's a lot of information and this is what it means. So I think if we can get that to work in here, both in, well, in any one of these 3 or all 3 of these.
3 of them probably.
Yeah, just where you're going, where you're forecast to go with kids and where you're going with buildings. Your buildings are going downhill and need a lot of money put into them, and your kids are not increasing in numbers to justify owning that many buildings. Educationally, your buildings are lagging in what other kids across the state have. How do you balance all this out? There's 3 different approaches: 7 schools, 3 schools, 7 schools, 4 schools, 3 schools. And that, I think, becomes the basis of this discussion. And hopefully we have a bunch of people show up and we have the press show up and someone writes a story going, okay, now we have a discussion because we have this information.
When do you, okay, to stay on timeline, go with Joe's comment. When does the board have to tell you which option to pursue? What's a drop dead date?
I think if we come out of next week's meeting with what we think we would hear, when we get together, when's our next meeting for this group?
That's my question. Well, it's not till the third week of May.
Right,
So we could schedule a special.
Yeah, so we'd have to look forward to bringing that forward, or doing a special meeting maybe, first week of May is too soon, but maybe not. So Jim and I can talk about it and communicate it to Mark, and we can see about setting up a meeting where we would have test fits and we would have a review of the comments that we got out of this meeting. Because we can do test fits on the 3 and 4 school option pretty quickly. The 7 school option is going to be driven, I think, more by site, and on the smaller schools, the need to get some adjustments there.
Our regular meeting date would be the 17th.
Okay.
So it would probably, I mean, I don't know without looking at the calendars and everything, so,
but why don't we just
the
let
first week might be tough.
Yeah, let's let it sit. 17th might work, because we're coming out of this on the 26th.
Right.
And so 17th might work. But what I'd like to see us do on the 17th.
You can always do another one after that.
Yeah, that might be the best thing. Because what people need to understand on the 7 school option is some of the schools are just too big. And so if you go to 7 schools, you're actually trying to downsize some of these buildings, which really throws people. The state says use 40,000 square feet. The state says 40,000 square feet is the building. Well, Huntington's 111,000 square feet. Mahan is bigger than that. Moriarty, Uncas. At least 4 of your buildings are bigger than the state would participate in. So you're making the buildings smaller. You're actually deconstructing buildings to get to 7 schools and maximize your reimbursement. Because everything that you spend above whatever the state agrees to, if you're going to renovate the building as new, you're paying for it yourself. So if you go into Huntington on a 7 school thing and don't want to take anything down, because the obvious step on Huntington is you take the new building and new part of the building and make that your school. And what do you do with the nice historic building in the front? Take it down? Or make it something else, and now you're sharing the site. So that becomes the problem with downsizing schools, is you get into these debates of what do you do with what's left. So I think it's valid. I think you need to have it in the report more than where we are right now. I think you do need to study it a little bit and be able to answer the questions. And the report needs to be able to answer the question without you there to interpret it. And so I think it would be valid to say, the committee might say 3 or 4 seems to be the valid way to go. I don't know that you need to vote right now. I think we need to move 7 far enough along where people see the potential impact of trying to do 7.
All right, Mark Kulis, I'll withdraw my motion. Whoever second would have to withdraw their second.
I agree. Greg agrees. The motion's withdrawn. Anything else before the committee? Well, hearing none, a motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
By Bill Hull. Second by Greg Carabine. Roll call vote in the room first. Peter Gauthier.
Yes.
Bill Hull.
Yes.
Yes.
Greg. Joe.
Yes.
Mark, yes. Stacy Gould.
Yes.
Cindy Beauregard.
Yes.
Christine DeStazio.
Yes.
Mark Kulos.
Yes.
And the vote is unanimous. We stand adjourned at 7:45 p.m. Thank you, everybody. We'll see
Good
you.
evening, everyone.
Or semi.
We met.
Not really.
Quick hello, hi.
No, losing that basketball. You know, last time I played basketball, I blew out my Achilles.
Directly.
Yeah.
You all right, Dean?
Yeah.